I think it was Pascal who said some looked at Christ and saw only a man, and some see the Eucharist and see only bread.
Yeah.
It seems just as insane to say that Eucharist is the second person of the Blessed Trinity than to say that man who just got back from the bathroom and, who has sweat is the second person.
When you think about the Eucharistic revival that's been going on for 3 years now, it's already scheduled for 2033 in Southern California, the next National Eucharistic Congress, to commemorate the 2000th anniversary of Jesus' death and resurrection. I can't help but wonder if, we have 70% real symbol, a sacred symbol, 30% real presence, or it isn't like we simply want to flip that and 70% believe in it. No, we want 100% to believe in the real presence. But we also want 100% to share this experience of Clopas where they said, not only are our eyes of faith open the breaking of the bread, but to set us up for that, our hearts were burning within us. Why is that not more than 30%? Why is that not? God desires that to be 100% for all of his sons and daughters, whether they're old, young, or in between. It isn't like I want this more than Jesus does.
I'm ashamed to say that when I heard about the Eucharistic Congress, I thought, oh dear, I hope this isn't just a shoddily thing thrown together for the sake of optics or for the sake of fulfilling some pastoral plan for the whole church.
Right.
Everyone I know who's been there, I didn't go, said it was outstanding.
It was stunning to the point of surreal. To be in the stadium, to be in the main sessions, to be in the breakout sessions, to be able to address, 500 or 600 priests for me, and to share Emmaus, to tell them about the priest conferences, to invite them, and then to speak to, I think, about 2,500 people with 1,500 people who were turned away because there wasn't enough chairs, and to share another version of this approach to the old and the new, and to show how the document illuminates the sacrament. One of the points that I made in that second presentation is that Jesus only calls one thing the New Testament in the New Testament. We call the document the New Testament, but the document shows that Jesus only used that kaine diatheke phrase in Greek, novum testamentum, when he was instituting the Eucharist.
So that Greek word can be translated as testament.
Yeah, kaine, new, diatheke, covenant or testament.
Okay.
Potato, basically, Okay. And so he doesn't say, write this in remembrance. He says, do this. But what is this? Well, it's the Eucharist. But they weren't calling it the Eucharist until the final third of the first century. What were they calling it? The New Testament. Why? Because that's what he called it. So what do we conclude? That the New Testament was a sacrament before it started to become a document, according to the document. In the earliest reference to the books of the New Testament, around 191 AD, I lay this all out in my book, Consuming the Word, the New Testament and the Eucharist in the early church, where I showed that the New Testament was the Eucharist in the early church.
Okay.
In 191, we hear about the books of the New Testament. But when you look at that statement in context, the New Testament was still the Eucharist. But these are the books that were written to be read and proclaimed as showing how Christ fulfilled the old. So these are the books of the Eucharist. These are the books of the New Testament. And in the 2nd century, Irenaeus is trying to show what is the source, the authority, and the standard for all of our doctrinal beliefs. He said, we base all of our beliefs upon the Eucharist, which is another way of saying we base all our beliefs upon the New Testament.
Yep.
So when the document is collected and officially canonized, in the second half of the 4th century, it wasn't like the church was in suspended animation. What are we supposed to believe? No, Jesus said, do this. They preach the gospel. They baptize new believers. They celebrate the breaking of the Eucharistic bread in Acts 2, Acts 20, 1 Corinthians. It's the idiomatic expression for what we would call the Eucharistic liturgy.
I think this is a quote from you, and I love it, and I'd love you to expand upon it. You said, I believe, the church is not a manual for a church, the Bible is not a manual for a church still in shrink wrap, but the Bible presupposes a church already in existence.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
Another thing that
because that is how we often look at it, or at least
I did.
Yeah.
I mean, for most of my young adult
Protestants
life
who might be
spiritually.
trying to start a church, they'll go to the church and go, hey, what should the church look like? But as you say, the church church wrote the Bible.
If you take a living organism out of its natural habitat to study it, say a botanist takes a plant out of the woods and brings it back to the lab and puts it under the hot bright lights and microscopes, and he wouldn't begin wondering, why is this withering and dying?
Or the fish out of the ocean.
What happens?
Yeah.
So when you take the New Testament document out of its sacramental context, in which it was written, for which it is written, by which it is proclaimed and fulfilled in the Eucharist, and then, you begin wondering, why are we forming, 20, 30, 40, over 40,000 denominations, all by people who sincerely believe that they're getting it right. They'd pass a polygraph. You could be totally sincere and still be sincerely wrong. But when you put the document back in its Eucharistic habitat, then suddenly you realize this is why we call it not just sacred tradition, but living tradition, because when you read the new in light of the old, and then you hear how the old is fulfilled by the new, this is the DNA of the early church.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. Before you go, do us a favor, leave a comment, let us know what you thought of the video, like, and subscribe.